All right. Hi, everyone. We're back after nearly a year because, I've been busy with teaching and whole other things, projects, and all that. But yeah, I guess you can expect more videos moving forward. But instead of breaking down, current affairs, we are going to focus on writing techniques and how you can ideate certain things and certainly some content lectures as well. So yeah. All right. So to keep things moving, essentially what we're going to discuss today is why your essays are not answering the essay question itself. So many students, they often struggle with answering the essay questions and they often ask why. And yes, we have been there with all these red marks and comments all over our exam scripts or homeworks and what have you. We do our damnness and we still end up with something with which we aren't very happy, and that can be very, very demoralizing, especially when we look at the grade that we get from all these comments. All right, now here's the thing: it's actually a very common thing, and broadly speaking, it can be boiled down to three things. All right, three things: question requirements, vocabulary, and content knowledge. In a minute, we are gonna break down what it means. And yeah, so if you have a piece of paper with you, take notes. I would recommend using an A4 sheet of paper, flip it to a landscape sort of orientation, draw three circles or squares in the middle of the paper from top to bottom. So how it should look like should be something like this, what you see on screen here. All right. Of course, however you want to take notes, that's ultimately up to you. But I'll recommend this, and then you fill in each circle as we move along. All right, as we break down the three big ideas, question requirements, vocabulary, and content knowledge, and then you branch out from there and write whatever notes that you have to. All right. So yeah, moving on. So first things first, question requirements. The first step is actually quite straightforward. Your essays are simply not engaging with the question. So this can mean one of two things. Number one, you're not actually dealing with the question itself. Number two, your phrasing is off. So for the first part, what it really requires is that you break down the question requirements carefully. Yeah, sounds like it's no shit, but let me expound. Engaging with the question requirements is really not just limited to the construction of your arguments or topic sentences themselves, but also to the execution of your explanation in the body paragraphs. So once we have a clear idea of what is it that the question requires from you, we can then work on the phrasing. So let's dive into the first bit. How do we actually break down key terms? The thing is that many students are taught since a young age. Yeah, if you hear any background noise, that's the mall's cleaners, cleaning the corridors. It's actually quite late already, so yeah, we're gonna just quickly plow through this. So what was I saying? Right, how do we actually break down the key terms? The thing is that many students are taught since a young age to simply underline your key terms, which, yes, that's the correct instruction, but we have to be hyper aware of the actual key terms with which we have to engage. So what I recommend really is to first identify two types of keywords or phrases. So the first one would be words or phrases that provide you with the question's thesis. And the second one would be words or phrases that provide you with the question's context. So for the thesis words or phrases, in short, they are typically quite clear because they come in the form of imperatives or assertions, and they essentially raise the question's argument. And for the second one, they raise the topic of discussion. Okay, so for example, if let's say we look at this one particular question here, all right? Assess the view that traditional businesses have no place in your society. So when I say that you have broadly speaking, two kinds of key terms to keep it simple. You have the assertion key terms, which is things like no place, have no place, right? Because they put forth an argument. And then the second kind, the contextual kinds, would be traditional businesses. And of course, question prompts assess the view and certain, I guess, context markers as well, like in your society. So the question essentially is putting forth the argument that traditional businesses, i.e., traditional businesses, but let's delve into that a little bit more in a bit, have no place, which also means have no future, right? Or they don't belong to a certain place. In your society, whatever parameters those are, that's up to you. But we are discussing it in the context of Singapore. And of course, if you are taking general paper at the A levels or English at the O levels, you'll want to discuss more of Singapore issues, right? So those are the sort of two main key terms. And for the assertion key terms, we want to define them using the dictionary meanings of those words. So what do I mean by that? If we go back to that question again, assess the view that traditional businesses have no place in our society, we kind of just did it, right? It means it has no future, right? It does not belong, etc. Okay? Traditional businesses, if we break it down by its dictionary meaning, it means that they are businesses that have to do with certain customs or a certain long established rituals or traditions in a particular society. The thing is that when we put it in the context of the economy, that typically means that we are looking at businesses that conduct either cultural forms of services or they produce cultural forms of products. And typically that also means artisanal kinds of production. Okay? Now, if we look at it in the context of Singapore, right? In other words, we are thinking about, traditional businesses like, let's say, those that have to do with certain cultural arts, right? Like street shows for the Chinese ethnicity here, or wayang kulit for the Malay ethnicity here, all right? Examples like that. If we are talking about performance arts, let me just get some water in here. Stay hydrated, stay in school. So as I was saying, right, of course, the next step is then to take all these key terms that you break down first by its traditional meaning, first by its dictionary meaning, and then we apply it to the context of the topic of discussion. So that's how we arrived at, definitions of traditional businesses referring to certain cultural products or cultural services. Businesses that do these things essentially, or offer, a core part of their market offering would be cultural services or products. Of course, that can also mean certain things like traditional in terms of something that has been established for a long time, right? And that also refers to, for instance, let's say, hey, tuition, right? Things like that. So private tuition services, etc. Okay. Now, of course, we're just playing around with the ideas here first. So we want to have as large a definition as possible. Then when we apply it to the topic of discussion itself, then we can start to scale down the parameters of our discussion here. Now, based on what we have so far, this is it. And this is actually very, very important because it ensures that you deal with the key terms accurately. And that's the main thing. It's not about how well you argue, it's about how accurately and how concisely you can argue. The thing is though, right, we have to be very careful of possible misinterpretations because the dictionary meanings of words, that's not enough because different words can mean different things in different contexts, right? So, which is why what I did earlier was to contextualize them in, with regard to the topic of discussion itself. That is very important. Okay. So why is this important? Because if you don't do this particular step correctly, it can easily bring your arguments down another tangent that perhaps would have nothing to do with the question whatsoever. And that's how you end up not answering the question requirements, right? So we must be constantly aware of what it is that we are trying to engage with, which requires a lot of attention to detail. So if we look at another example, a very simple one, this is an O-level standards question. Young people spend so much time thinking about the future that they forget to enjoy the present. Okay, so essentially what you're seeing on screen here, it will be the second question that we are looking at. Now, I was just going through this with one of my students earlier today, and I pointed this word out to him. This particular word, that is very, very important, because in the syntax here, right, it serves as a connector between two ideas. So the first idea is young people spend so much time thinking about the future. They think about the future excessively. Okay? Now, what does that future actually entail? We can certainly unpack that further, but we have to first look at what's the topic of discussion, right? The second idea would be they forget to enjoy the present. And again, we can unpack that further. So if let's say we do that unpacking now, when we talk about thinking about the future for young people, it typically refers to things like career aspirations, life aspirations, be it in terms of familial relationships or certain other kinds of social relationships, and material pursuits. So perhaps perhaps they aspire to own a home one day, things like that. That they forget to enjoy the present. So forget to enjoy the present means appreciating what they have now and basically being aware of the accomplishments that they have achieved so far, right? The thing is that, going back to what I said about being hyper aware of all these key terms, if we don't pay attention to this word here, we forget that actually both these ideas come together in the context of what this particular question is arguing for. What do I mean? So, if we forget about this, some students may end up just addressing this part. Young people spend so much time thinking about the future, and then they neglect the second idea. Or they spend all their time engaging with the second one, and they forget to address this part in the explanation. So this word essentially in this case serves as a conjunction that connects these two ideas together, and it not only connects these two ideas together, it establishes a causal relationship between them. Because of the fact that young people spend so much time thinking about the future, they, as a result, forget to enjoy the present. So what that means is that when you construct your arguments, right, you have to address this one singular compound idea and that sort of causal cause and effect relationship between these two ideas. So for instance, students might write, young people indeed spend too much time thinking about the future because of reasons XYZ, when they should really be writing, young people indeed spend too much time thinking about the future, so much so that they forget to enjoy the present, as they are distracted or they focus too much on certain things, right? They develop this myopic view because they're just thinking about what comes next instead of thinking about what they're currently experiencing, right? So this is where we have to play around with perspectives when it comes to constructing our arguments, and therein lies the trap, right? Which is why often if we are not aware of the question requirements and the specific nuances in all these questions, then we end up not answering the question at all. So yeah, and that brings me to the next thing, right? Which is phrasing. So the next step essentially is to ensure that you phrase your points carefully, which kind of, is related to what I just said. For this part, a simple structure that you can follow is argument and reason, right? So, for instance, earlier I said, oh, young people indeed spend too much time thinking about the future that they forget to enjoy the present because of reasons X, Y, Z. That is one simple way that you can phrase your topic sentences in your body paragraphs such that they answer the question directly. All right? Of course, we can go deeper than that, but we'll explore that later on. The thing is that if you struggle with these basics, right? So, i.e., connecting the ideas together, defining your assertion key terms properly, or unpacking what the topic of discussion is, all right? Then I would suggest that you go back and revise your language basics. And of course, seek help from your teachers or, even myself, right? So if you don't struggle with these basics and you kind of get what I'm trying to say here, what I'm trying to communicate in this particular portion, the next step that you need to do is to raise your awareness of the specific nuances of all these key terms. And to do this, there's really only 3 methods here. Practice, practice, and practice. Yeah. All right. But of course, since it's the most common error, a lot of students lack that awareness, which is why you really need to practice more. But what if things go beyond that? That brings us to the next part, which is the reason, number 2, or second reason, I guess, as to why your essay points are not answering the question is because of vocabulary. I just want to make it clear though. In this particular case, I'm not talking about having knowledge on a large variety of words, right? So I'm not talking about things like, for instance, Moira Rose having these very, very huge bombastic words in Schitt's Creek. No, I'm not talking about that. Although it can certainly help, just to be clear, if you know how to use them and, if you know how that can serve the overall writing, right? But what I'm actually talking about here when I talk about vocabulary is the specificity of our word choices, or our language choices, I guess. So what do I mean by that, right? The thing is that when it comes to these kinds of argumentative essays, right, and certainly it's not just in general paper or English, or if you're an international student, whatever language subject that we're talking about, where you have to write an argumentative piece of writing, I'm also talking about other art subjects like history, economics, I guess literature, So we can sharpen our topic sentences by being aware of the specific language that are used in very, very specific contexts, as well as the accompanying jargons. So what do I mean by this? For instance, once I had a case where one of my ex-students, he was attempting to explain why the government has such a large responsibility in ensuring the healthcare needs of the citizens. So the question, as you can see here, is, to what extent is the government responsible for the healthcare needs of the people? All right. So yeah, I'm gonna switch the screen here. So, take this question down if you want to. The ideas that he was trying to communicate in one of his points was this. Number 1, they have the most resources, the government. Number 2, as a result of that, they therefore have the obligation to take care of the people. And number 3, in a democratic context, the government represents the will of the people. Because of these 3, I guess, parts to a chain of logic. That those things form the base ingredients of that one particular argument. But the problem was that he struggled to communicate these ideas effectively because he lacked the knowledge of the words that he should use to do that job for him, right? So he would want to write, for instance, something like, governments have the obligation to ensure the healthcare needs of the people, as democratically elected governments have the mandate of the people, right? But he didn't know words like mandate, or at the very least, he knew what it meant, but he didn't know how to apply it in this context. He didn't know how to apply the word obligation, right? And then he also forgot about the caveat of democratically elected governments. And when that happens, what students tend to do is they would then, devolve into very, very basic and vague languages, right? So to build upon what I just said, governments have the obligation to do so, as democratically elected governments have the mandate of the people. Such a mandate empowers them to utilize tax revenues to fund public services and improve access, and thereafter overall societal well-being. So that is quite long, so I'm just gonna copy it and show you what I mean here. All right. So this is what he should ideally aspire to when it comes to, beginning a sort of argument in favor of the question's thesis, right? Something like that. You can pause here and take some time to read if you need to. But end up, what he did was he wrote something like, it is the job of the government to do this, as they are the most important people. As they are the most important people, they have to ensure access to healthcare. So I'm gonna show you an example of what he wrote. To be clear, this is not verbatim. I'm sort of paraphrasing it a little bit because obviously I can't remember it verbatim. But this is what he wrote in the end. And obviously, right, his argument then becomes implicit, and the examiner would then assume the surface level interpretation of what he wrote, and then the examiner would read his arguments accordingly, which was what happened. So end up, his essay didn't do so well, or rather he didn't do so well at that particular essay because his arguments were not sharp enough. So of course, for GP students, you would have encountered a lot of teachers saying, sharpen your argument, sharpen your argument, sharpen your argument. This is what we meet, all right? And the $1 million question here, I guess, is, okay, how do we work on this, all right? So apropos of this, we can move on to the third reason that, that sort of holding your essay back from being as good as it can be in answering the question, and that is content knowledge. Again, a caveat here. Content knowledge doesn't just mean knowing plenty of examples, all right? And by examples, of course, I mean real-world affairs. At the level of A-levels, you shouldn't be using any personal anecdotes anymore, nor should you be cooking up fake statistics that come from fake sources. No, you shouldn't do that. You should use real sources anchored by, you should use real information anchored by credible sources of information. All right. Now, as I was saying, content knowledge doesn't mean knowing plenty of examples. It actually means having a deeper understanding of why things happen, how they happen, how institutions, communities, or even individuals behave in relation to one another to create problems or phenomena, or to come up with solutions to certain social ills. Because fundamentally, that's what general paper is all about, right? Or, if you are writing this for another subject, whatever it is that the subject is investigating, right along those lines. So I don't really want to delve much deeper into this because we have another video coming up that really fleshes this out in detail. But suffice to say, if you lack knowledge of, for instance, the specific benefits or drawbacks of technology in society, you would not know what arguments to form, let alone, the necessary vocabulary to construct these arguments in the first place. So, another example of what one of my ex-students did was, when she first came to me, all right, she wrote an essay about the environment. So the topic of discussion was about the environment. The specific essay question was this: the damage, something along those lines, to be clear. The damage to the environment is now beyond repair. Discuss. So, what she did, okay, was she tried to flesh out the negative impacts of certain environmental issues, which is fine, because that's in line with what the question requires content-wise. But because the knowledge was so rudimentary, and by rudimentary, I mean, back then, she really only knew about basic climate change impacts, right? So she didn't know about things like the 1.5 degrees Celsius cut-off point, carbon budget. She didn't know about supply issues. She didn't know about, the energy sector, natural resource exploitation, all these things. So she could not formulate the appropriate topic sentences. And she ended up with very generic answers like, indeed, it is beyond repair as climate change is highly negative, right? Because she just didn't know what to write. So never mind the collocation of climate change is highly negative. The problem is that when I marked that essay, it was so vague that I really couldn't glean much from what she said in that particular argument. It was too implicit. So obviously the essay, she didn't do so well for the essay. Thankfully though, she has gone on to do quite well eventually for her exams. But the point remains, right? Because at that point when she first came to me, she did not know what to communicate. She did not have the appropriate words or jargons to enhance her arguments. So, back to the original questions. Why are you not answering? Why are your essays not answering the question requirements? 3 things: awareness of the question requirements, vocabulary, and content knowledge. How do we work on these things? So we talked quite exhaustively about question requirements already here, but in terms of vocabulary and content knowledge, we'll break it down in further videos. But for the writing aspect of whatever coursework you're doing, I would suggest that, students first work on getting a strong grasp on, awareness of the question requirements. Define your key terms carefully, and you should be fine. Practice, and practice. Okay? So, yeah. That's it. If you found this helpful, I'll appreciate it if you give us a sub or follow, whichever platform that you're seeing this. And of course, if you have questions about our tuition lessons at the Discourse Education, feel free to, contact us. All our contact details are already in our YouTube page details, or if you are watching this on probably TikTok, because I don't really want to use Instagram anymore, because of, if you're following the news, it's 2025 February. If you're following the news, you would know why I don't really want to support any sort of meta platforms anymore. give us a follow, contact us for a free trial if you need, and I will see you guys next time.